Have you ever wondered how to look at a scene in a movie from Hollywood and know how to light that cinematically? How did they light it? What are tips and tricks that I can learn or that I can even just observe in these movies and say, how do I apply that to my own stuff and make my footage look cinematic? Well, a lot of times, to be honest, it takes just practice. But I do believe, this is something I believe in very strongly, if you know what to look for, you can watch Hollywood films and other people's work and analyze it and learn from them so that you can start applying those tips and tricks tomorrow on your stuff. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be looking at, I think, 7 different shots from a variety of scenes from the movie Dune, Part 1. I'm going to be breaking down specific lighting details that a lot of people don't think to look for. They have to kind of train themselves to look for. So think of this, if you're not familiar with tips like shadow side, motivated lighting, what a key light is, what texture in light might be, then I'm going to be explaining that to you. And I hope this is helpful. And let's just have a good time exploring the art that this, the director of photography, Craig Fraser, brought to us in this film. So you guys ready? Let's get into it. Let's look at the first shot we have here. So the very first one we have Paul Atreides. He's during the fight scene, and it's lit beautifully, but in some ways simply. It's basically the main light source is coming from the window. But there's a lot going on in the scene, even if you are not aware. You might just think, oh, they shot light through that window, and then everything just kind of looks good because they had good cameras, right? That's not the case. You could shoot this with, an iPhone with one of those lens attachments onto it, or a simple Canon DSLR, and make it look this good if you light things correctly. So what I have here is I have a little diagram to point out what's going on lighting-wise. So let's just start first with shadow side. I've talked about this on previous videos. One of the first things you should know about making something look cinematic is to shoot shadow side, and that essentially means where's the shadows on the face. If you have the strongest light hitting someone on one side of the face, then you should put the camera on the other side. So the predominant part of their face that the camera's seeing is the shadow side. So right off the bat with this shot, we see with Paul, they're shooting shadow side, and I got that circled there on his face. The next thing to look for is, where is the main source of light? Where is it coming from? Well, I have this little second picture as a diagram to show you. It's coming through that texturized window. And in that specific shot with his trainer, that's actually textured light because they have a textured block on that light. In this shot for Paul, where might be the interesting light textures that you see? Well, it's on the floor that window is casting shadows for. It adds a lot of depth and just something interesting to the image. So you have that strong, motivated window light. Motivated meaning we know where the light's coming from because they showed us in the other shot that it's coming from that window. So we're not confused as to where the light source is in the scene. Let's look at a couple other items. You have depth, and I've talked about this before. The way you create depth in an image is color difference mixed with exposure difference. And so for right here, look at his shirt, look at his skin. It is brighter than that little illuminating light that's hitting that wall behind him. If you see those arrows in that depth section, then you can see there's an exposure difference, and obviously there's a color difference. The background is more of that burnt orange brown tones, and his shirt is like this off-white color, and same with his skin tones. So you have color and exposure difference. Then you also, to give it a little bit of extra bump, if you look real closely, pull him away from the background to emphasize him a little bit more as they put a little backlight off to the side, motivated backlight. So what they did is they probably just had a light shining on him or shining through a blanket just to give a little touch on the rim of his shoulder and his hair to separate him from the background. But they used it in a motivated way. They created this in such a way to make it look like that light reflecting In the corner, off to the side on that back wall, that's that burnt orange color, is actually creating an illuminating outline that's very delicate on his shoulders, his shirt, and his hair. So you have motivated backlight, motivated key light, depth, shadow side, texture. These are the things that makes up a good shot. This is a pretty easy one. I want to take a look at a couple more. The next one is actually also very basic as well, because you clearly see where the light source is coming from. Clearly. It's that little spot of light, that little window in the back that's shooting into the room. And the cool thing about this is it's working almost like a spotlight to illuminate that wall, going across the wall, hitting the back of him, and creating a little bit of light on his face. Look at this in a diagram way. It doesn't look like they did, but they actually did shoot shadow side because his eye line is looking to this side of the camera. Now, if he was looking to this side of the camera, then they wouldn't be shooting shadow side. And then the texture is actually the shadow side of that light, that spotlight, hitting that really cool design that they put on the wall of those sandworms. And so that's kind of where the interesting texture part of the light comes into this image. You obviously have the motivated key light, which is a window that is creating the source of the light in this scene. And it's hitting him kind of as a behind key light, and it's working as a mix between a key light and a backlight because it's hitting his shoulder, his arm, and the side of his face. Then you have clear depth because he's so dark and he's got a little bit of green, bluish tones to his outfit. It separates him from those warm or kind of whiter, warm walls that are surrounding him. So you see color and exposure depth on the walls and him. When you're creating depth, it always should be what is the focus, what is the subject of the frame, which is Paul Atreides here, and then what is the background, and so what's behind him. There should be some color difference, some depth there. And notice they switched it. On the other shot I did, he was brighter than the background. Now with this, he's darker than the background, but there's still that color depth. Let's go ahead and go to another one. The next one is simple. It's him outside. It's a cloudy day. There's got some shadows on his face, but overall, it's very clean, soft light. This is actually something a lot of filmmakers use in a quick way. You know, they'll either shade the subject or they'll shoot on a cloudy day because it makes a very nice even light. It's a little boring at times, but it's really easy to work with. However, even with something as simply lit as this, there is still a lot of detail we can pull from it. For example, they're shooting shadow side. Once again, I want to point that out in every one of these because it's good to get in your mind. You have the texture in the light, in the shadows, in the background. That's literally the beach, the rocks, the cliffside. That's actual light texture. If the whole background was just the sky, then it'd be very soft texture. But this is giving us a little bit more of an interesting texture that's created by the angle of the light and just the image itself. You have the depth. Once again, the background is brighter than he is, and the tones are a little bit different. He's just the slightest bit warmer than the cool background that he is up against. And then you actually have the motivated key light. So although they're shooting in a day that's cloudy and it's kind of creating this softbox effect, you still have a side of the face that is being hit by a key light in a very, very soft way. And that's being motivated from the sky and perhaps even, I didn't label it here, being reflected off the water into his face. Because that skylight is hitting the white or the brownish white sand at his feet, you have a nice little soft fill that's filling the dark side of the face, so it's not in complete shadow. It's a simpler shot, probably didn't take as long to set up, but it still has a lot that we can pull from it. This is a really cool shot because it actually has leading lines that are awesome because they're trying to get in the ship, they're trying to escape a worm, they're trying to escape getting eaten, essentially. It's cool because the leading lines on the top of them and the bottom of them, it's this cool profile, leading lines, it's literally creating a scissor effect to show you where is the importance in the shot, and it's obviously the two people that are standing inside of this scissor angle. We obviously have depth in this image. They are darker and have more texture than the background, and the colors are different. And then you have the shoot shadow side because they're looking off to this side of the camera. So all of this side of them on their face and everything, on both of them, it's in the shadow side. Then you have the texture. The texture is interesting in this because, like I said, the foreground has a lot of detail because of their outfits in the ship, and the background is super soft. It's just very soft sand dunes, very soft sky lighting. And so the texture is different than we've seen before. It's not like really detailed texture, but it is a texture difference between the foreground and the background, which also adds depth as well. You have the motivated the motivated key light, which is the sun, which is coming down and hitting, on this side, hitting them in the face with a really harsh light. And then you actually have a motivated fill light that kind of fills in some of their face coming from the bottom, which is the sun being reflected off the sand. This would be really interesting. I'm sure it's very difficult to film in any kind of desert because you just have constant sunlight. And in order to get harsh lights, but not too harsh, is also very difficult. If you just put a blanket over them and shield them from the light, create a softbox effect, it looks unnatural. That warm desert harsh sunlight is not hitting them correctly to make it look authentic. If you don't do that and you use the sun, you're getting too harsh of shadows. And so it's a really difficult balance, and also actors are getting hot. They have to wear all these costumes and everything. So it's hard work, and it should be appreciated. This one I chose because it is all over the place. It really is. So we have a group of people. I wanted to focus on this shot where we have Leto Atreides standing a little closer than the other individuals. So we have two main light sources. So if you look at the top right-hand smaller picture, you have the motivated key lights are coming from two directions, and it's hitting everyone on the sides of the face. Now, it's hitting people hotter on one side if they're closer to the light, or on the other side if they're closer to that light. So it actually depends on the person on what shadow side. Does that make sense? So if you look at this shot with Paul and Leto, on Leto, it kind of looks like his key lights hitting him on this side and they're shooting shadow side. Where if you look in the background at Paul, they're actually not shooting shadow side. You have the shadow sides established. You have the texture, which actually, this is interesting. The texture they chose for this room was mist or fog because they wanted this room to feel like it was kind of dirty and dusty. Them, on these backgrounds, it's actually the texture is a soft glow. So it's not a detailed texture, it's a soft glow texture. It's this dusty air texture. You also have a little bit of motivated backlight, if you see that below the texture circle, and that is using the key to backlight a few of these characters, like Paul. And then you have a little bit of motivated fill, because if those were the only light sources, then Leto would be in complete shadow on his face. What they have is, I'm sure they put some light on them in production, but the motivation of that light is supposed to be kind of the room as a whole / being reflective off the floor from those two light sources. So let's go to the next one. We have kind of an interesting shot. They chose to use the sun as the key light and as the backlight at the exact same time. So if we break this one down, they're shooting shadow side. But the interesting thing about this is their whole bodies are shadow side because the key light is behind them. They're all walking away from the light, and it's also illuminating their shoulders and are really hot, and their hairline. It's making them really stand out from the background. The texture is, once again, kind of this softer, dirty, dusty texture that's differentiating them from the background. So there's that wall plays a big role in kind of this blocky texture look. Like I said, you have the motivated key light, and the backlight is the same light, essentially. It's illuminating, outlining them, and that's the main light source. You also have a nice fill that rises up on their face to fill them in from the sand reflecting onto them. And then the depth is, once again, they are darker than the background, as opposed to them being brighter than the background, which also adds depth. They're darker, and there's a different color there. Let's look at the last one here. And I really like this one because this is just a very simple, beautiful close-up shot. It's well crafted. We have a light source That is the window, the top right-hand side. What you see over Duncan's shoulder is actually the light source that's hitting Paul Atreides in the face. But it's actually really cool what they did here, because even if you didn't have that, they are showing you in his close-up where the light source is coming from. We know it's not that window on the way back side of the room or that big door, but we know there's most likely another door right next to him, because they're literally showing us this is a room of big doors. They show us what kind of motivation this light's coming from. It's coming from outside, and it shows us the direction the light is coming. So obviously, they shoot shadow side. The depth is something I want to take a second to acknowledge, because there's not really color difference, and there's only a little bit of exposure difference in this shot when it comes to depth. What they did to compensate for that was they chose to make it extremely blurred out. They gave it a lot of depth of field. They pulled their aperture way up, and probably to like a 2.0 or 1.8 or something like that, or 1.5. And they chose to make the depth, him really sharp, the background really out of focus. And that's the depth they chose, along with just a little bit of exposure difference. The texture is actually those really blurry people in the background that are moving. That's kind of the texture in the image. And then you have the motivated key light, as I already said, is that window that's shooting him in the face, that's over Duncan's shoulder. But even in Paul Atreides' close-up, it shows us what a window looks like. That one's just a good ways behind him. And it's cool they framed this up to even make you kind of believe if this light on his face could possibly come from that back window, even though we know it's not. But they framed it up in such a way that, well, it also could be that window a little bit as well. So it's really cool the way you can choose to light things. It honestly is. And if you take these kind of ideas of making sure you shoot shadow side, create depth in your image, make sure you have motivated light source, motivated key, fill, backlighting, based on what's the scene showing us as the light source, and then you use that to motivate the light for the whole scene, and you add a little bit of texture, well, then you're on your way to making your stuff look absolutely incredible, just like Dune, just like these crazy Hollywood films. So I hope you take this, and I hope you start experimenting yourself and enjoy the process of learning something and then implementing it in your own body of work. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, if it was helpful to you, I ask that you subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you thought, if you learned anything, and like the video. I really appreciate it. And if you want to see another video of mine where I talk about the filmmaking aspects of Dune, you can watch last week's video, but I'll leave a link for it in the description and on the end screen. So thanks so much.